Please me to welcome our speakers and hand over to Rory. Rory, thank you very much.
Brilliant. Right, I will just present slides. Lloyd, if you can give me a shout when they're coming through.
Yeah, all good.
Fantastic. Yeah, so good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to Suzanne and Rob, who wasn't able to make it today, for the invite to be able to speak with you all today. I'll just do some very quick introductions to myself and Lloyd. I know Suzanne's already done them, but just for those who are joining us online or at a later date. So yeah, my name's Rory Prentice and I work as a geospatial consultant at Ordnance Survey within our consultancy team. And I'm joined by Lloyd John, who is a graduate within that team also. There's a couple of others whose names, if you've worked with OS before, you might recognise, Pam and Danny, who also make up that Welsh customer team, but unfortunately they couldn't make it today. So as a team, one of our key responsibilities is to support all of the Welsh public sector customers, which is why we've been invited along to speak with you all today. So as a quick structure to the webinar, we've done some quick introductions. Previously, OS have done a webinar with Data Cymru some years ago, where they sort of went through very early stages in terms of PSJ when it had just been launched. So we're going to recap a little bit of what OS and the PSJ is, but the focus of this webinar is going to be much more on the side of data and use cases. So we're going to go into what products we have, the data we have, how you can view and access it, as well as go into a demonstration to show you the sorts of things you can do in a bit more detail. We're also then going to cover some customer use cases, some stories from 3 of our customers, and then we're going to share some useful links that when we PDF this afterwards, you'll be able to access at your own leisure. So hopefully, by the end of the webinar, you'll have an understanding of what data is available to all of you and how geospatial information can benefit your organisation. So without further ado, Ordnance Survey, I think recognising a few names in the chat, a lot of people will already know Ordnance Survey. But for those that don't, or for those that have a very sort of surface level knowledge, most people tend to know us through paper maps or the OS Maps app. And this is a really big part of what we do. It's all about helping people to get outside and explore the countryside and I guess sort of promote the benefits that can have to people's physical and mental well-being. However, increasingly more so nowadays, and our central commitment for the last decade or so has been all about being Great Britain's national mapping organisation. So we capture all of Great Britain's geographical features through flying the country and through a team of field surveyors, and this picks up features like the buildings, the roads, land, water, and other features around you day to day that you see in the physical landscape. We then integrate this data with some third-party information to maintain a national database of all these features, and then we turn it into accessible data for our customers in products. So all of this goes towards underpinning the national infrastructure in a number of ways. So one of these is local government, which is obviously why we're on the call today, but we have customers right across England, Scotland and Wales in a number of sectors. So it might be health, might be emergency services, energy, sustainability, land and property, transport, logistics, etc. So there's a number of sectors in which OS data can support. So going back to the PSJ, I mentioned it as an acronym, and I'm always in danger of using acronyms and then never explaining them. So Lloyd, tell me off if I do that. So PSJ stands for Public Sector Geospatial Agreement. So to give you a bit of background, back in 2020, the Geospatial Commission, which is now under the Government Digital Service, which sits in the DSIT, signed a contract with Ordnance Survey to enable the public sector to access all of the location data we captured for free at the point of use. So it's centrally funded by organisations like Welsh Government, and it's a 10-year agreement and provides geospatial data across the entirety of Great Britain. In addition to the data, it also enables any PSJ member to get support from technical teams within OS, so that's where Lloyd and myself sit, to help them use the data to its fullest. So currently, there's about 5,500 public sector organisations across Great Britain that are signed up to the PSJ. And in Wales, you've got a few examples on screen. So you've got Welsh Government, Natural Resources Wales, Senedd Cymru, Welsh Parliament, NHS Wales, local government, emergency services, etc. So it's right across the breadth of the sort of Welsh public sector. We'll touch a bit more on some of those later on in the use cases. And just to give you a sort of plug for our support and a picture of what that looks like, essentially that's from getting started on using the data, how do I find what I'm looking for, information on licensing it, right across to being seconded into an organisation for a bespoke project. So that breadth of resource that we have to help within the consultancy team is something that's fully funded in the PSJ also. So it's definitely something alongside the data, you get those services as well. So yeah, that's a brief recap of what OS is, as well as the PSJ. If there's any questions on that, we'll take those at the end, and more than happy to go into the detail there. But for now, I'll pass over to Lloyd, who's going to go into more detail on OS products and the data.
Brilliant. Thanks for that intro, Rory. Yeah, bore da pawb. Great to see everyone. Great to be here today. Yeah, so I'm just going to take us through, a bit of the OS product offering. I'm going to be starting with the OS master map generation data. So the data that we've been capturing for over a century has been feeding into products that have been developing over time, and some of them you may have heard of. So the master map generation is some of the products that we've been offering for the last 2 decades or so. And this can generally be categorized into 2 types. So we have our download data. And yeah, just the record, I'm not going to go through everything on here, don't worry, but our download data. So this is things like our addressing, so the addressing data set for GB, or something like master map topography layer, which you may have heard of, which is the comprehensive view of GB's landscapes and all of the features within it, all in one place. But we also offer a variety of API services. So these are things such as OS Maps API. So if you have some spatial data, this is the contextual data, which gives it geographical reference and context that underlays it, or something such as OS Places API, which is the addressing, but in API format, which is great for address lookups and so on. But if you go to the next slide, please, Rob. The thing I want to talk about in a little bit more detail, a bit more specifically today, is something called the OS National Geographic Database, or the OS-NGD is what we're referring to it as. So this was a separate data stream from the master map generation products that was released in September 22. But this is still the authoritative data that describes the geography of Great Britain. The sort of analogy we use, and if our colleague Danny was here today, he'd be annoyed with me if I didn't use this analogy, so I'll go for it. But sort of the key difference that we use to explain why NGD is different from the master map products is sort of the analogy of walking into a Lego shop. So if you go into a Lego shop, you'll have your pre-packaged products. So you might be looking for like an X-Wing or a Star Destroyer or something like that. And when you buy this product, you will take all of the data or all of the Lego within the product, and you can sort of make up what you want from it. But generally, the product has been designed to be built and used in a certain way. And this is sort of similar with our master map generation products. So for something like master map topography layer, we, OS, have already decided what data make up this product, and therefore generally what it's used for. But also within a Lego shop, you'll have your select and build station. So a lot of random stuff in there. And in this section, you can just sort of take the Lego that you want to build the product or build the data that you want. And this is probably more similar to what we refer to as NGD. So you're not having to take all of the data and use it in a predefined way. You can sort of take the elements that you want from it. So for example, buildings over a certain height or a number of floors, or a site that's a university campus, for example, and use it in a more dynamic way. So within the NGD, we still offer our APIs, but the download service is slightly different. It's very similar to that select and build analogy that select that Lego select and build analogy I just gave. So we now have this OS select and build service, which allows you to go in and really tailor the packages that you want, only take in that data that you want over the area that you need it for. Another key feature with the NGD is we've gone back to breaking this data down into themes. So we have 9 themes spanning over things such as transport, man-made structures, the general land use that an area is primarily used for, buildings, and so on. But I'll be going into that in a bit more detail shortly. If you go to the next slide, please. And just some key features then of the NGD then to support what I've just said. One element is the currency. So some of this data is updated daily, so it's more current. It's richer. We're always adding to the attribution, bringing you more data on a 6-monthly basis. Easy to use formats, personalized selections, only taking the data that you need, and also a full documentation platform with sort of technical guides and inspiration pages, videos, tutorials, code blocks, and so on, really to support your usage and integration of the NGD. So what I'll do now is I'm just going to jump into something called the OS product viewer. So do you want to stop sharing here, Ro, and I'll share my screen and then something like that? Cool. Hopefully this will work okay.
I'll let you know, Lloyd.
Cool.
Yeah, I've got that.
Nice one. All right, thanks. So this is the NGD product viewer. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time, but I realize, I've been talking about a lot of stuff up to now, sort of from slides, and it might just be useful for people to see the data and see what we mean by all of this NGD data. So this is publicly available. We'll share the link for this afterwards, but it's essentially just a sample viewer for all of the NGD data, so that you can go in, have a look what's in there, play around with it, and sort of see the sort of stuff that we offer. So this is a landing page, but I'm going to go in for Exeter here. So we have a few sample locations. Okay, so it's this sort of map-centric application. So I'm just going to come in here, and like I mentioned, we have all of the NGD themes listed out here. And it's just worth pointing out that this in itself, for anyone that might not be sure, this isn't an analytical tool in itself, or somewhere you can access the data. You'd still have to access the data through our data hub, and use it in your own systems, but it's merely a tool just to get used to all the data. So yeah, we have our themes here. So if I start with buildings, for example, so one of the things we capture are buildings, and we capture the general geometry or the shape of the building, as you can see here. And then for each feature, we capture all of the associated attribution which will relate to it. So I'll just go through some of these bits here. So for every feature within NGD, it has an associated OS ID. So this is the unique identifier for every feature within our data. So for building, we also have things such as a description. So this is just a general description for what the building is. So ancillary building, but if I was to look at something like this, here we have multiple residential accommodation because I'm on a university campus here. This is something that's quite useful. So often we provide linkages between different data. So here what this is looking at the OS land use TRA, and this is just recognizing that this is generally an educational site, and that'll make a bit more sense when I show another theme of data in a second. We also have address count. So this is another linkage. This is relating to some of our addressing information. And this is just, as this is university halls, this is relating to the fact that there are 25 addresses, obviously, within this building. And we also split this out into residential and commercial and other. And in this case, this is residential because it's student accommodation. So some newer things then that have also come out is information relating to sort of like the physical aspect of the building. So we have the construction material. We have sort of the general range of when the building may have been constructed. We have information as to whether there's a basement present. In this case, it's not. We have information on the number of floors. And so, as Rory will show in his demo as well, with some of the newer stuff that's coming out, we're continually adding to the richness of the stuff within NGD. So if I just come out of buildings for a second and go into land use. So this is more concerned with wrapping up an area and looking what is its primary use. So I'll turn on here and I'll turn on site. Turn on that. So this is a slightly different view now. So if I just look at the general site of the university campus here, so you can see that the description is different. We have, obviously, this is now a university. But you can see the OS land use TRA here. It's also referring to the fact that it's an educational site. So that's a nice linkage there between the data. I have some additional information regarding the university. We also have this sort of site level view of addressing now as well. So obviously, because it's a bigger area, more addresses. But yeah, this is so it's an example of how some of our data sort of links together and all wraps up. If I was to come in here, so you have a slightly different view here. This is sort of a site around not just one residential accommodation, but this is actually referring to probably the residential accommodation park as a whole. So if I look at this one, it'll refer to the fact that this is the residential sort of site itself is called La Frauda, and it includes the building that I was referring to beforehand. So that's buildings and land use. I'm not going to go through everything here, but we've touched on address a bit, but also we have things such as transport. So we have our different networks in here. So we have our road information, our rail information, our tram information, our paths. So if I just turn on NGD transport on the routing and asset management information, one of the layers we have in here is average indicative speed. So this is relating to the speed information for our roads. So you can see in here we have the average speeds, but also a temporal aspect. So the average speeds and how they vary across different times of the day, which could be beneficial to you depending on the type of analysis you're doing. And also things such as what type of road it is, a minor road, a primary road, a motorway. But anyway, I'm not going to smash on for too long about that, but because it'd be great for you guys to have a look yourselves and play around with the bits that you're interested in. But hopefully that gives a little bit of context behind the type of thing that we're talking about up to now and allows you to see it for yourself. So, and we'll share this link afterwards. I'll just stop sharing. If you want to reshare, Rory. Great.
Have you got that?
Yeah, got that. Okay. So just to wrap all that up then, that section, this is the OS Data Hub. So this is really the one-stop shop for everything OS data. So this is where you'd get the master map products. This is where you'd also get the NGD products, as well as the services such as select and build for that. Our APIs are in here, our error reporting, because there are errors in the data as data is data, how-to guides, documentation, code examples. This is really your one-stop shop. And if you're a PSGA member, you can access all of this. So I'll pass back over to Rory now for the demo on some of the recent releases.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lloyd. Yeah, so I think just to hammer home the point Lloyd mentioned earlier, that product viewer, really, really great way to explore the data. However, when you're getting to the side of using it, and you're taking data from the data hub, which is that portal, you need certain softwares to be able to actually use it. And so the demo I'm going to show you is actually once you've got it in a software, what can you do with it? What have we got? What can you do with it? So I'll stop sharing and then I will share. Sharing all over the place, aren't we? Here we go. Lloyd, can you let me know when we've got that through?
Yeah, I can see that.
Lovely, thank you. So on screen is an example of one, I say, GIS software provider. So this is QGIS, which is a free and open source GIS platform. I've acronymed again. GIS stands for Geographic Information System. So it's a category of software. So this one's QGIS. There are lots of other options that you may have heard of. You've got ArcGIS, CAD Core map info that performs similar functions. And in this demo, I'm going to go through the latest data releases that came out in March of this year, and then look at a few examples of the kind of questions you can ask from that data. So before we get started, just for a bit of setting the scene of what you're actually looking at, on screen, I've added our OS Maps API. So this is a API service that calls a backdrop map using all of our topographic data, and then it's styled to certain themes. So in this case, I'm using the light theme, if you can see my cursor. And as I zoom in, you can see that the sort of zoom levels changes, text changes, etc. So really great way to get some backdrop contextual mapping in for you to be able to overlay data onto. I'm then going to add in some boundaries data. So let me just add in this one. So this is from OSNGD Administrative and Statistical Units, which is a mouthful to say, so I just tend to call it boundaries. And boundaries data contains various levels of geographies that you can display. So you've got local authority, electoral divisions, historic counties. In this example, just to keep it relatively focused, I'm using our Welsh communities data, which I've filtered to just show the Mumbles community area. And that's going to be the area of focus for this example. And so we're then going to look at some OSNGD transport data, which was released in March of this year. So there's two new developments, two new major releases. The first of these was that we released new streetlight information. So I'll add those in now. So these are point geometries for the location of all individual streetlights. So you can see their position there. I think more valuably, more interestingly, we also added additional attribution onto existing road links and path links, which provide an indication of the coverage of light along a particular stretch of road or path. And this can be anything that's from fully lit, it's like a categorical value of fully lit, mostly unlit, and fully unlit. And I'm going to show you what that looks like. To do street lighting, I think we'll make it nighttime. Hopefully that loads all right. And I'm going to add in that information so you can see it. So if I expand the road links layer, you can see that the light yellow colors with the sort of illuminated effect are street and road and path links that are fully lit, whereas your darker red ones are fully unlit. So it's taking that streetlight information and it's connecting it to the road for you, so you can get an indication of that, how well lit that particular network is. Now, some really interesting visuals, sort of paint a picture, but it's all about how can you use it. So this area here is a park, and to the northeast of the park, we've got this sort of cul-de-sac here with a really well-lit street. However, if we load in an example from our sites data, which Lloyd showed, which is an education site, in this case it's a primary school here, you can start to picture how this might be used. So one area might be that you're looking at potentially using this data to identify the need for new street lighting. So if you take that cul-de-sac in the northeast and you're saying that there needs to be walkable, safe routes to school, it's which route do you take? Do you direct them to a park? If you're thinking in terms of winter time, where the days are short, end of school, that's the kind of data where you can get an insight into, actually, yes, we can look at all the routes, but knowing how well lit they are in early evening and twilight hours is useful from a safety point of view. On the flip side, if you don't want to look at where do we need new street lighting, but understanding, well, which routes are currently safe because we don't have the funding for new street lighting, you can then use that information to I guess better make decisions from that. And that can be any service. It can be a school, but it can equally be libraries, GPs, leisure centres, etc. I think one we've had conversations with local authorities about, as well as other organisations, is actually what else you can do. So it could even be that you're looking at areas that have really high density of streetlights, and you're looking at where you can perhaps, I guess, sort of oscillate them on and off, lower the frequency or turn certain ones off. It could even be that some of them get decommissioned and repurposed, whether it's for EV charge points, 5G infrastructure. So it's a really simple data set, but then the use cases sort of branch out from there. And I think that's something that can be really valuable for different kinds of decision making. So yeah, that's the streetlights attributes that we've added in March 2025. And I'll turn all of that off, and I'll go show you an example now of some buildings data and some of the releases we've had there. So let me load this. Okay, so like before, we have our boundaries data. So I showed you the community boundary previously. This one is Welsh Unitary Authorities, and I've filtered this to show just the area of Swansea. And this is going to be the demo area for buildings. I'm then going to hopefully bring in buildings data and not crash the call or blow up my laptop. So hopefully you'll see that load. You just get a picture of the sort of, it's loading because there are so many buildings that are trying to be added. So the sort of coverage that you've got here, these are all the buildings in Swansea. I'm then going to zoom into a sample area so we can then see what we're looking at. And in this example, we've got the sort of village of Llangenith. And we're going to have a look at our buildings data in a bit more detail. So I've styled all of the buildings data, these individual polygons, on a new attribute that we've released, which is solar panel presence. This indicates very simply if there are solar panels present on the roof of a building. So your yellowy orange, and I'll expand the legend here so you can see it where my cursor is on the left. The yellowy orange indicates if there are solar panels present on the building. The grey if they're not present. How do we get this information? We use imagery and machine learning to automatically detect solar panels, and then it assigns a value to a building. So if I bring in some imagery very briefly, and I'll bring it in for this, just this area alone. If you make a note of the buildings in the sort of yellowy orange that have been marked with solar panels, if I then turn that off and you look at the imagery underneath, you can see the solar panels where my cursor is on those buildings. And so that's what the process is doing. It's looking at the imagery, it's assigning pixels, and then it's applying that solar panel present value to the building. So that's something you've released. You can see which buildings have solar panels and which don't. But I suppose one of the questions we always get asked is, but what more can I do with that? I want to have actionable insight from that information. So one question you could ask is, how would I find, of the buildings that don't have solar panels, how would I find the buildings best suited to new solar panels? And to do this, we need to dig slightly further into some of the attribution in NGD. So alongside solar panel presence, we also have roof geometry attributes. So if I click on, I'll click on this one, and I will open it up on the right of screen so you can see. We have a series of attributes which give the areas of pitched roofs, so it's anything above 15 degrees from the horizontal, which face in sort of the 8 directions of a compass: north, northeast, east, etc. And so when you're thinking about solar panels and what you'd want from your ideal sort of suitable candidate buildings for this question, you're going to want large south-facing roofs, which are on a pitched roof, because that's where they're going to generate the most electricity. We also need to consider the size of them. If it's a building that's too small, that cost of insulation isn't going to be worth it versus the energy that it produces. So you can see there's multiple factors to do with building geometry and the physical environment that inform that decision making. So within here, in this building in particular, if I select this roof shape aspect area facing south attribute, you can see that it has an area meters squared. So if for our question of which of the suitable buildings we say, right, we want to have buildings that don't have solar panels, and we want the area to be greater than a set value. So in this case, I think in the example I've made it 40 meters squared. We can then combine those to return just suitable buildings. So I'm going to turn off the imagery, I'm going to deselect that, and then I will add in the suitable buildings. And these will be in green. So I'll turn it on and then off again. And you can see that using those attributes, it's picked up values. So this one we'd selected previously. It does not have a solar panel present currently, and it has a large area facing south. So that is a good building. Whereas, let's say this example here, if I click on this one, yes, it doesn't have solar panels, but actually it doesn't have an area facing south. And you could extend this to make it actually cover southeast, south and southwest, because actually it's not just buildings facing in that direction that would be viable. So yeah, those would be the options for how you'd find those suitable buildings. But you may then want to look at how that, I guess, is distributed across a large area. So we're going to go back up to our local authority area for Swansea. And I'm going to zoom to this one, and I'm going to turn off the buildings. And you can start to look at actually how many suitable buildings are there across that space. So I've done some calculations to count those buildings by ward. So I'll put the legend up so you can see the sort of numbers you're looking at, but the dark green being wards that have a really high count of suitable buildings. Similarly, the lighter green being those with low counts. So it's kind of as you expect, the more rural areas have less buildings. Some of the busy areas have a lot more suitable buildings, which is useful information. But we can then take it slightly further. We can look at the proportion of buildings that are suitable. So if I pull this one over here, zoom out a little, and so I can take actually all the buildings in that area, and then I can look at the comparison on the ratios, proportion of buildings which are suitable. And so actually get some really interesting insight, which is although there's very few buildings in the sort of Gower area in the Swansea Authority, actually, some of them have a really high proportion of suitable buildings. So Nicholston, 22.5% versus the Townhill ward, which is 1.2%. So it's just a way of demonstrating the power of GIS. You've got individual data on buildings. You can then aggregate that up to get statistics and look at it more holistically. I think, yeah, instead of, you've got that option for using counts instead. And I think when you're talking about applying this, we've had conversations with Welsh Government. They have a warm homes nest scheme, and I think the UK government has an Eco4 scheme, which is all about funding for solar panels. And they mainly look at low energy efficiency homes, low income households. But this is the kind of an insight that would enable those initiatives to be much more targeted and effective. You get the building geometries as well as the sort of, I guess, domestic information or social information around it. So it's a really powerful tool to combine them. And to be honest, I've sort of mocked this up in the last couple of days. Actually, you can make it a lot better. I'll zoom back into Llangennych and load the suitable buildings data. I don't know if anyone spotted it, but I've actually picked up a suitable building of a church. This is probably going to be a listed building and not a suitable candidate. So you could take this a lot further and say, actually, this is the description. I'd only want residential buildings or commercial buildings, or we've got a particular project which is all about schools, and you can filter for those prior to your analysis. So it's all about combining different attributes together. Additionally, actually, we didn't even touch on this one. There's a primary material for the roof material. And so actually you might want to exclude certain roof materials that we have in our data, like thatch, because it's a fire risk, or, in town centres, lots of roofs have glass roofs. And so actually, whether there's sort of structural integrity issues there that you may not want to include as candidate buildings for the analysis. So really, just to give you an indication of a couple of attributes that we release in NGD, the sorts of things you can do with them. But really, there's endless range of application. It just needs yourselves, your colleagues, to start asking questions of how it can be useful in your own organisation. So yeah, so hopefully that gives you a bit of insight. I'll now pop back over to the use cases section. So I'll stop sharing those, and then we'll try and reshare the slides again.
We might just want to be a little bit conscious of time, Rory. Just maybe limit this for like 10, 12 minutes or so. Yeah,
of course. Thanks, Lloyd. Okay, so use cases. So for those last 10 minutes, we've been working really closely with local authorities, and we've pulled together a few sort of local authority examples where they've benefited from incorporating NGD into their decision making. So first of all, just to lay a bit of a sort of set the scene, councils obviously have all sorts of responsibilities for an extensive number of services, and the data they can benefit from is pretty much anything that interacts with a physical location. So the first area we're going to look at is all to do with planning. And it's how planning teams can use it, I guess, for sort of open spaces and green infrastructure. It also links into environmental teams and leisure parks too, so we'll explore that use case. So set the scene. Most councils typically work with, we have 1 or 2 people within their data team, and they have responsibilities for data management as well as receiving requests from various sort of internal departments in the local authority. One request we've heard from quite frequently, so from councils, I think in Torfaen, Caerphilly to name but a few, was for help in identifying open spaces. And this was based primarily on planning policy guidance that you've got on screen. It's TAN 16. This is a document that needs to be taken into account by local planning authorities when assessing existing need and provision, and when determining future requirements for open space and recreational facilities. So the customer was essentially really interested in whether we could provide them with a data set that pretty much matches those features that you've got on the typologies on the right of screen. So public parks or gardens, allotments, outdoor sports facilities, as well as informal green space areas. So they really wanted, can we get a data set for that? Right, and yeah, so what we did was we helped support customers create a recipe using a combination of NGD themes, and made use of the attribution within those themes to meet the open spaces policy. Not all the categories could be met, so things like civic spaces couldn't, but the majority could be. And this was a really significant improvement, as what we often heard from councils is that they've been using data sets that were a static cut from some time in the past. You know, they got a consultant in, they've done a really great piece of work, but it's been, you know, it's almost 10 years later, and they're using the same data set and things have changed in real space. So by switching to NGD, they're using a much more current data set, but also a much more granular one, which allows the end user, in this case, it was the planning teams in those local authorities, to make more informed decisions. They've also actually been able to avoid increased costs from funding some of the data collection themselves, where this is paying contractors or diverting resource from elsewhere in the council. So in a time when budgets are really tight, any time resource can be saved. That was really, really helpful. And so the next steps with this kind of work is actually we're working really closely with Welsh Government to make this insight available to any public sector customers through Data Map Wales, as this is something that every local authority could benefit from. We want to work with them to do some of the heavy lifting on the data processing side so that people can just take the data. Plus it helps consistency across Wales, which is an added bonus. But yeah, a really interesting use case that has sort of far-reaching application across all local authorities. Lloyd, if I pass you for the next one.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Rory. So next we're just going to have a little look at travel time and how that's being used in different ways. A really broad sort of transferable concept, but in this example, we're going to look at sort of like the leisure and cultural services impact, as well as potentially its use within sort of like around education. Next slide, please. Thank you. So yeah, for anyone that's not sure on sort of like what the concept of travel time is, it really allows us to sort of calculate how, I guess, accessible certain areas are in relation to time. And where you really see the value of travel time is when we're looking at it sort of from the perspective of along a certain network, as opposed to just as the crow flies, because geography, as we know, does impact our ability to reach certain areas. If you have a river, like in that visual in the middle, the pink one, it really does influence our ability to sort of how far we can travel in that direction as opposed to another one. And so, yeah, travel time along a network does allow us to work out these accurate distances. And like I said, travel time is really transferable, but sort of a high level example of where it could be used in that blue visual is something that we looked at in terms of how could we look at sort of our data and look at it from a walk time perspective and look at travel time to GPs within Cardiff. So this is this type of analysis is called an isochrone. So it's looking at sort of from a single point and how long it takes, or how far you can travel outward from that point in a sort of 360 degrees around it. And straight away, you can really start to see where some of these cold spots might be. Where are the areas where it takes longer than you would expect to reach some of these GPs? You can see maybe down the Bay area in Cardiff, maybe some of the northern sections. Looking at that walk time perspective. And we do offer a product called the OS Multimodal Routing Network. This is a specifically designed network which includes all of our rail, road, ferry, and path networks all in one place. And you can really play around with it, filter it to sort of filter out the networks that are relevant to your analysis. And it's been designed to really just sort of be plug in and use with many different routing applications out there. But if you just go to the next slide, please, I'm just going to talk about a real world example where we know the OSMRN has been used. And this is by Northumberland County Council for their mobile library service. So this is quite a nice example because it's something a bit different to maybe the classic examples of travel time. But essentially, they wanted to calculate the optimal routes for how this service would operate within the borough. And the requirement for this was they needed a routable network to be able to use for the analysis. And they had a look at a couple of different products that we offer, but it was actually the average speed information, which was really useful to them within the MRN to be able to find these optimal routes. And the way they did it, they had their information on where the locations were that they needed to call into. By using an application called PG Routing, they would combine that with the MRN to be able to then sort of calculate what would the most time efficient route be for this service. So the impact is that by doing so, residents even in the rural areas of the borough could have this library access, and obviously the efficiency benefits of running the service. But one interesting thing is that not all the drivers are following these optimal routes straight away. Some of them are sort of still maintaining their own routes, and some of them are using these calculated routes. And I believe after a certain amount of time, they're going to compare some of these sort of efficiency savings and be able to quantify what the benefits are. So yeah, that's a nice example. But also routing, like I said, could be used in education. We're aware of it being used for safe walking routes to schools, something that Rory mentioned earlier, maybe looking at sort of catchment areas in a similar context to schools and different things. But yeah, a far-reaching concept or transferable concept for sure. Pass back over to you, Rory.
Yeah. Okay, so final use case, where at the time, which is all to do with a very, very recent case study conversation we had last week, actually, with our colleagues at Keep Wales Tidy. So they're a charity, for those who aren't aware, committed to working with local communities across Wales to protect the environment now and for the future. So they're doing some work for a project called GLAN. And this is basically a new initiative which stands for Geospatial Litter Analysis, which is a nice sort of cross-reference of the Welsh translation. So this is a innovative and world-leading litter data collection methodology that is applicable across multiple land uses. So the idea is that GLAN will provide detailed analysis as well as data visualizations to help local authorities have greater insight for litter-related policy. I think as well, it's been designed basically for the communities, researchers, policymakers. It's all about actionable insight to inform litter reduction strategies, whether it's monitoring intervention outcomes and support evidence-based environmental stewardship. So they're doing this project. They've done similar ones previously, I think, with LEAMS, which stands for Local Environmental Audit and Management System, I think. And so they were looking to basically expand the methodology versus that previous one, incorporating a more comprehensive site of locations, essentially so they can give more insight. That was their aim, and they came to us saying, we've used some OS data before, but we're aware you've got some new offerings. What can that do for us? How can that help? Yes, so the result of that is that following some conversations and some back and forth, Keep Wales Tidy and the GLAM project were incorporated some OS NGD data to provide a complete resource that suits the operational needs of their methodology. So by applying filters to the attributes within NGD land use and transport network, the team were able to identify all the locations they needed for their survey. So these were publicly accessible sites from land use, as well as streets and paths. The surveyors and the team are now using this data internally, and they've built some really impressive dashboards and sort of mapping tools via Esri to assist them with this. And it's dramatically increased their time efficiency compared to the previous methodology, just because it makes planning so easy. And then when they're on the ground, they have all the information in front of them. They can be much more flexible with their approach. So yeah, another really good example where we've worked with the customer. There's a single initiative because it applies. It's valuable to all of the Welsh public sector, and yeah, it's something we're really keen to support. So if there's ever any initiatives like that where they're sort of universal in scope, we're always keen to help. Okay, so just some final thoughts before I hand back over to Suzanne, and if there's any questions, more than happy to answer them. It's just to sort of make known that currently every single Welsh local authority is signed up to the PSJ, has access to the data, has access to our help, and is using the data to varying degrees. But I'm aware there might be people on the call who this is the first time they're hearing about any sort of OS related information, and are wondering, okay, we've got it, but how do I get hold of it? If you need that, we can always get in touch with us, and we can help find your organization's principal contact. So it's a principal contact for the data hub. So if there needs any linking up there to facilitate conversations, we're more than happy to help you get started. From our perspective, although all the organisations are signed up, we are really keen to make sure that the Welsh public sector gets full value for this. You know, it's paid for centrally, and it's already prepaid. The data's there for free. So it's trying to make sure that people can get full value from those services that are available to them. And then just finally, when we share the slide deck later, this final slide will have some resource information for you to explore in your own time. So I've put up in the top right, I put up the contact OS sort of link, but you've also got both mine and Lloyd's email addresses. As Lloyd mentioned earlier briefly, we've got a documentation platform. We've got the NGD product viewer, so that was for you to be able to visualize the data yourself over those sample areas. So the one Lloyd showed was Exeter. A link to the OS data hub, and then we've also got the More Than Maps page, which is all about sort of using the data. It's a technical support page that the consultancy team have built and maintained. And then some other useful tools. We've got OS GitHub, which has got some more sort of code examples if you're more in the developer space. And then if you're looking through the documentation, think, how do I find this feature? I really want schools, or I really want hospitals, or just want to look at residential features. That OS NGD description search is really useful for telling you where that data sits within our data structure. Yeah, so hopefully those links will be useful when you want to explore in your own time. But just to say, actually, do come and message us if you don't know where to start. That's what we're here for. It's the data. It's also our help. So you don't have to go about it and search on your own. So yeah, just to say thank you for listening. Thank you to Suzanne for the invite and being able to speak with you today. And yeah, enjoy the sunny weather and the lunch.
Thank you ever so much, Rory and Lloyd. That was excellent. And I know I nearly didn't come in because I was still looking at the screen and looking at all the examples you were given. So that was really inspiring, really excellent. If anybody on the chat does, if anybody on the chat does have a question, please enter it into the chat bar now. I had a question and I was very pleased, and then you answered it at the very last minute. So I don't even have a question anymore. So I suspect that may be the case, that you've actually given all the information that was needed. While our listeners are thinking, one thing to mention is that you mentioned Data Maps Wales there, which is the mapping tool that Welsh Government have created and host on their website. The guys from Welsh Government who manage Data Maps Wales did actually do a webinar for us. Again, I think it was around about the time that the original Ordnance Survey webinar happened. So you should, for those of you who want to learn a bit more about Data Maps Wales, you should be able to go onto our website, onto our webinar page. There you'll be able to see our previous webinars, so all recorded webinars are there. and there should be, I believe it was recorded, there should be a Data Mapped Wales recording there. So if you do want to learn more about the Data Mapped Wales aspect of that, then you can. But if there are any questions, as I say, any questions on the Ordnance Survey webinar information you've heard today, please. Okay. Obviously, my question was going to be around about, as a layperson who may be hearing this for the first time, how do you go about? Obviously, the NGD viewer is there, and that's really, really powerful, I think, for somebody who might be just dipping their toes into it, want to know what's possible before they take it any further. I think that's really, really positive. But obviously, then beyond that, if you've got any specific requirements, how would you go about it? But obviously, you've said then get in touch with yourselves, or there's a principal lead within each authority as well that can field those queries.
Yeah, I think you said it, Suzanne. I think that product viewer, I think we tend to, Lloyd and I, when we first got into this, it was always about finding an area and looking at that data, because that's stuff that you can cross-reference with reality, and I think that's really helpful for understanding it.
Somebody who lives in Newport and went to Exeter University, I find that it was actually just for me. So
it wasn't intentional.
Well, we did as well, which is why we picked that example. But yeah, there's we're aware there's a lot in there, so just being able to go in and have a look in your own time is useful for sure.
Absolutely, definitely. Excellent. So we've got some comments saying how much people have enjoyed it, but there are no questions. So on that basis, I will draw a close to today's session. Thank you once again, Rory and to Lloyd, for the presentation. It was really, really informative. And to all of you for joining us, I will say thank you and goodbye, and stop the recording.
Thank you all.
Cheers all.
Thank you.